Church hurt. We were talking about church hurt in the previous episode, and now this episode we're continuing with that. Only this time we're looking at it from the other side of the ministerial authority in the pulpit. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, church hurt. We're still talking about church hurt, and what we mean by that is, well, first off, welcome back into the King's Forge. I'm Randy. We have Summer at the table, and we're talking about times that sometimes the church, in fact, hurts people, and that's been used, misused, and abused, and sometimes people claim that they've been hurt when they haven't been hurt, and sometimes there's all kinds of, but we all understand, if most of us in this culture understand what we say when we say church hurt, we know kind of what we're talking about. And we delved through that a little bit last time about how that comes up and what that sort of looks like. But one thing we didn't talk about very much is, what does it look like? What is it when the person who is hurt by the church is on the other side of the ministry? Mm-hmm. The minister, the music minister, your pastor, people who are in positions or of appointment within the church structure, like your secretary and your groundskeepers and those kind of people that are employed by the church. What happens when they get wounded and hurt? And how much of a reproach is it upon the whole body of Christ when we have such a hard time dealing with each other in ways that we can't seem to understand how to communicate or how to deal with situations as they pop up without somehow seriously wounding each other? How do we deal with that? I guess first I'd like to say, I've seen Sunday school teachers, people who have been faithful, and teachers of a Sunday school class. This one particular individual, I'm not going to name names, was a Sunday school teacher for a number of years, and was wounded by their church, hurt by their church. I've seen people. Unfortunately, I've actually seen people that were asked to leave a church and were not ever really given a really good reason as to why. I've seen people asked to leave a church. Now, this one's interesting. I will say this one, and I may get negative talk about this. I don't know. This happens to be a church that at the time I was very heavily affiliated with and very actively helping in ministry, and this was right when COVID was first really becoming an issue. Mm-hmm. And there was a local event in the town where this particular church is. And this local event it's an annual event, and it happens to be a very big, very large attendance, and I'm talking thousands of people. And normally, the church facility opens its doors for those who need to use the restroom facilities and things like that. And because of the issues associated with COVID, the church had decided that rather than risk some sort of exposure, that it may be best that they not do that. Well, and so they decided they're not going to just open the doors for everybody to come through. That being said, there were two ladies. One of them was a pregnant woman who was in late-term pregnancy who had to use the restroom. And the other was an elderly woman who needed to use the restroom. And a person of the church said, you know what? This is a little bit different circumstance. I'm going to let you in. And let those two people in. And was admonished and punished by the church.
Oh, my goodness.
And
that's a little over the top.
It was very over the top. And I was sad to see that happen. Now, I will also say this. There may be more to that than I'm aware of. Those are the factors that I was and am aware of. And from where I sat and still sit, I was like, horrible way to handle that situation. And people were hurt. People got their feelings hurt. I was doing nice. I was ministering to the needs of the people that were here at the time. And got chastised and punished for it. So yeah, we can sometimes go off the deep end. So what happens when you're part of the ministry team, when you're one of the one that's actively working, you're actively doing all this stuff, because and most of those people, when we're in those positions, most of those people have a heart for people, especially if it's an unpaid position. They're doing this because they want to help people out. They want to help their church family. They want to give back into their church. Maybe they don't have a lot of financial ability, but they have physical labor in spades. And they say, you know what? I can't give a lot of money to my church to help support it, but I can wash windows, and I can clean floors, and I can unclog toilets, and I can stock toilet paper, and I can repair gutters, and I can caulk windows, and I can mow the lawn, or insert whatever here. And then something happens. Somebody takes their gift and picks it apart. Well, they mow the yard, but they don't weed eat. Something so innocuously whatever. Yeah. And it hurts people's feelings. They feel like what I'm giving is being looked down upon. It's not being appreciated, and that weighs on people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be very tough when you are in a paid position in a church, and you have leaders who have been members of the church for some even decades, and that's whether they mean to or not, that's how they see you. Well, we are paying you for this, and so you need to do this near perfect. I've had situations where people of the church have looked at me as a pastor and said, well, you don't do this well enough, or, well, you need to make this part better. And there's different levels to that. For one, telling someone what areas they need to improve is a good thing. All of us have areas where we need to improve. And we need to be open to hearing about those things. Constructive criticism. We've got to be open to that. But it's when a pastor or when anyone hears nothing but criticisms, and they don't get the encouragement, and they're not told what they do well. They're only told little things that they need to improve over and over again, that a person begins to feel beat down and not good enough. And then they start to question their call. Am I really cut out for this? Is this really where I'm supposed to be? Is there something different I can do? And it's those sort of things that lead to pastoral burnout, which is a huge issue. We have a lot of pastors who, and it doesn't happen overnight. And so churches really need to be on the lookout for this, for their pastor, for any of their paid staff, especially the ministerial staff, to be watchful, because it's a very slow process, but this is what it could lead to. It all starts out to where, we'll just say the pastor, but when I say pastor, think any paid ministerial staff who is in front of the congregation as a full-time job or even a part-time job. but they're the ones in front of the congregation. They hear the negative talk. And they start to see the negativity happening within the church. And it may not really be noticeable to anyone else, but this is what they are seeing. And this is what they are hearing. And they begin to hear this over and over again. That's when they begin to question their call. That's when they begin to think, okay, things are not going well. Now, the pastor can either choose to confront it or to overlook it, and it depends on the issue at hand. But what could happen is if it continues, if it gets worse, the pastor burns out. And if you notice your pastor not in their office very much, seem to have a concerned look on their face at all times, if they start to seem distant, if things that they were once doing well start to not be so good, don't think, oh, the pastor must not be taking this job seriously anymore, or things must be happening that are just negative. Think, what is it that is causing my pastor to feel this way, to experience these emotions, to take this path, to not be so positive? And address those. Don't just say, well, now you're not doing this at all. Do you even care? We don't see you anymore. You're not tending to our needs. You're not taking care of us. If you start to put it back to where it begins to sound like your pastor is a robot, their burnout will only continue. And it could very well lead to mental health issues. And if the ministry and life becomes too overbearing, we have had many pastors, statistically proven, pastors commit suicide because ministry becomes overwhelming.
And that's a heavy subject. I mean, one of the things, and it's two ways. I'll say this too. For those who are really considering wanting to be in the ministry, and this is going to sound weighty and heavy, and it is, but this is what I usually advise people. Keep in mind who it is that you're claiming that you want to follow and emulate, and that is Jesus. And Jesus was called to be crucified by the very people he came to talk to preach to. Mm-hmm. And we haven't changed that much.
Oh, yeah.
I'd love to say that we have. But humans are humans. And we're still flawed. We're still problematic. We still eat our own. Kids in school bully other kids. Workers at work bully other workers. And, we like to think that somehow civility has increased in our world. But I'm not so sure that it actually has. That being said, a lot of times you need to understand that the ministry that happens in and through the church is not the responsibility of the pastor. Mm-hmm. It is the responsibility of the church congregation. And if you're part of the congregation and you're not active in the ministry of the church, reevaluate what it is that you can do, what gifts you have been given that God is saying, I gave you these gifts so that you could be a part of what I'm doing, and you want your pastor to do it for you while you do something else. We have to, if you call yourself a Christian, if you attend church, then you at least are involved enough to take a serious look at yourself, introspection, and say, am I really being genuine and giving everything I have to this? Think about it. If you want to be a professional football player, at some point you're going to say, I better be giving my all because somebody wants this spot. If I want to be a great chef, I better be learning how to cook and learning how to season food and learning how to prepare food very well, or nobody's going to eat it. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to be a Christian, then I better be a serious Christian. I better really understand what it is Christianity is actually all about, so that not only I can walk in it in fullness, but also that I can explain what it is when people are curious. I can correct those who are incorrect about what Christianity actually is. And I can actually do the work of the church, the ministry of the church, in full effectiveness when I'm fully immersed, when I'm all in. When I'm all in. That's when you can love human beings to the best. You can actually start to discern needs. You'd be shocked at how well you could learn to discern needs around you when you tune in to the ministry aspect of the church. You'll start learning. And you may say, well, I never noticed that before. I never noticed that before. I never noticed that before. And you start noticing. And then you start seeing similarities and patterns. The next thing you know, you've got your finger right on the pulse of every ministry in your church. You know who needs help. You can identify people. Well, they've never been here before, but they need help. And you know why. And you can guard their honor and privacy. You don't have to put all their business out in the street. And yet, you don't even have to know what their business is. I don't need to know what your business is. I need a little bit of help. Okay, tell me what help you need. That much I need to know. I don't need to know the rest. I don't need to know if you've got problems with your boss. You don't have to come and bare your soul to me to receive ministry from the church. I would admonish you and I would recommend that you bare yourself and be honest with Christ. Absolutely. But anything that you tell me, I'm just going to tell you right now. I'm just going to say, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to hold it against you. You're forgiven. But I'm not the guy. I'm not the guy that saves you. I'm not the guy that does anything else for you. I may be able to meet an immediate need right here, right now. That may be all I can do. But the person that's going to meet all your needs and the person that's going to feed you fully is going to be Jesus Christ. Now, I guess rerouting from that digression. Being hurt by the church is detrimental in that not only is it witnessed by usually more than either the person that spoke the hurtful thing or did the hurtful action and the recipient of it. Other people learn about it sooner or later. It's going to happen. Or were witness to the event if it was a dynamic enough event that they saw it or heard it. And so now they're carrying the burden of that as well, and that can ripple throughout an entire congregation. It can erode trust. It can deter serious intimate connections, the kind that we need. The fellowship within the body gets damaged. The entire ministry of the church, all of it starts to suffer. All of it. Not just one area. And those people that are usually focused on one area, well, this needs to be improved. 99% of the time, it doesn't need to be improved. You need to be less critical. And I've run into that. People can be so critical. Well, it's not being done the way that I would do it. Well, then why aren't you doing it? If it's going to make you happy to do it. If it's not, I'm not you. And I will never do anything the way you do it. We may have some similarities, but we're going to have some differences. And you need to be humble enough to allow for those things in other people. We should never be so haughty and prideful that we demand that the people that are in positions of ministry do something exactly the way we want it, because we aren't the head of the church. Neither is the pastor. Christ is the head of the church. As long as things are being done biblically, how they get done doesn't matter.
I think that's one thing is important to note is what are the responsibilities of the pastor, and the way I define that as someone who is called into pastoral ministry, it's simply this: A pastor is called to lead the church in doing the ministries. That does not mean, as you've said, the pastor does the ministries. So even in terms of visiting the sick and the homebound, in terms of teaching, you don't see a pastor teaching all Sunday school classes. You don't see a pastor even able to visit all the people that need to be visited. You don't see a pastor preaching every single Sunday for 52 Sundays every year for years on end. There is always someone else who is called to these different areas. One pastor does not also lead all the music. And I also want to say, in terms of music ministry and your music people, they're not always going to sing the hymn that you want them to, or the style of music that you want them to, but to have the variety with the gifts that involve the entire congregation is the goal there. That's just a little side note. Back to the pastor. The responsibility of a pastor is to simply lead and guide. It's a servant leadership modeled after Jesus. Jesus led his 12 disciples for 3 years. 3 years. If you think about that, that's not very long. He led them, he taught them, and then he sent them out, the apostles, to do the ministry. So they did it in the name of Jesus as he taught them. So a pastor's role, to be involved in all the ministries of the church, to know what is going on, to know your people, but to be there as a spiritual leader, to take care of the spiritual needs of the people, to be present. But every person in the church has their own gift and skill and ability and passion to do the many different areas of the church. You can read in the book of Acts where some people went to the apostles and said, you aren't paying any attention to us over here in this town, and our widows and orphans are not getting the help that you're giving to the widows and orphans here in Jerusalem. And how unfair that was. But then the apostles were like, well, we can't stretch ourselves that thin. So what did they do? They prayed. God showed them people like Barnabas, the encourager, to go and tend to the people in the other areas. You see how that works. So one of the things that I pride myself in as a pastor is knowing my congregation well enough and being able to prayerfully discern what are the gifts and skills of each individual person. And when I find somebody who wants to teach, wants to preach a sermon, wants to give a message, we schedule that. We make it happen. It's not always me. Somebody else may be called to lead the message. Our youth will lead a Sunday because it encourages them to use their gifts and their skills to do so. And it also shows the church, look at our next generation who's leading the church. And opening those opportunities up to everyone in the church to lead equally. So it's not all on one person. So what you think your pastor may not be good at doing is just an opportunity for the people of the church to really evaluate, well, who in our church is good at doing this? So I want to say one final thing. When it comes to a church looking for a pastor, what that church needs to first discern is what is the gifts and skills of the congregation, what is the needs, and what are the gifts of the entire congregation as one. Where is the church headed? What does the church need to further the message? And you want to find a pastor that will help the church go in that direction. Mm-hmm. So don't say, well, we're just a small church, so all we want is somebody who will go visit and preach a sermon, because that's not it.
You know, we have gotten into some biblical education, and we've gotten into some, on a minor level, preaching and things on this program. But by and large, this program, Sharpening Iron, the conversation that we have here, it's a Christian-based Socratic discussion talking about the challenges that we face as Christians on how to live our lives as actual Christians. But it's by design, not specifically preachy or, today turn to Leviticus chapter 3. We don't do that on purpose, because while we are an online ministry platform, I am a firm believer ministry should be more than just a spectator sport. Mm-hmm. So if you're just tuning in, listening, or if you're just tuning in or watching our videos or whatever, I am so grateful for that. And if that's where you stop with what you learn from us, I'm all right if you just decide not to watch us. And that's weird for most people to say that have a platform like this. Just turn me off. I'm okay. Because the whole point is to join in the conversation where you are. There are people around you that are encountering the same issues. There are people in your neck of the woods that are desperately trying to figure out, how do I live my faith walk as a Christian in the middle of all this stuff, when everything around me seems like it's in chaos, and my life is not necessarily perfect. I mean, it's chaotic as well. And I don't mean just me personally. I mean, everybody as an individual. We've all got issues with our job. We've all got issues with our family. Somebody somewhere is sick. Somebody's got something coming up. Oh, I've got to pay this bill. I can't afford that. Oh, I'm so much in debt, or I've got school debt, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're constantly being pulled and constantly being rocked and swayed and constantly being thrown things in our life that make us irritable, that make us depressed, that make us angry, that make us full of anxiety, that make us full of all of these problematic emotions and feelings. And we're trying to maintain our world from a Christian viewpoint. Mm-hmm. And how do we do that in the midst of all of that whirlwind? Well, the first thing we do is we learn to be able to be open enough to talk about our real problems. Christians, and I'm not advocating that we should discard Bible study. It's my foundation. I think if you need to be in your Bible. However, you'd be shocked at how many times that people hide behind the either the Bible study or the sermon or the setting within a church environment. Those are the three big hiding places. Okay, whenever I need to avoid something that's really I personally am struggling with, right? I can avoid it by doing one of three things. Hey, did you hear what the pastor said on Monday about so and so? And now I don't have to deal about me. We can deal with Or you know what? There's this thing in the Bible. I'm going to ask you about this, and then you get into this Bible study, and this person thinks, "Well, I've done good. I've been, But the real reality was that I asked you about that so that it would distract you from you asking me about what's really bothering me and getting to the root of my problem. And I've watched people hide with these techniques for years, and eventually they hide long enough until usually the problem gets so great they can't anymore. And it could be a myriad of problems. It could be they're undergoing serious amounts of depression. It could be that they are battling alcoholism secretly, and it's starting to catch up in their lives, and it's starting to hit them financially. They're starting to drink at work, and they're starting to take bigger and bigger risks and all kinds of stuff. I've seen lots of weird things. And it always, these people that do these hiding tactics always comes to the same place. Everybody says the same thing. Oh, I never knew. Mm-hmm. I never knew it was that bad. Folks, it is hurtful to them if we as a church are so disengaged that we're not noticing the areas of ministry in our own church. We are letting our congregation members down, and we are hurting them by our neglect. See, now we've talked about hurting with accidentally. I said something I didn't mean to hurt you, but it just hurt you. We've talked about hurting. Well, it may be intentional. Yeah, I said what I said, and I hoped it made you mad. That kind of thing. We talked about hurting, but now we talk about the hurt that comes from neglect, and this one is, I think, the most insidious. I think this is one of the biggest problems we have as a church, because we don't like to associate the church with the word neglect. We never like that. No, we're the church. But the fact of the matter is, there have been people within the church congregation that have experienced profound neglect by the church, because the church was expecting them to be a warm number in a pew. And as long as you're a warm number in the pew, we're fine. We're not looking to really minister to you. And I know there's people out there that hear this. They go, you know what? I've experienced that myself. I went to a church and, they knew my name and didn't know anything else about me. I was involved with a church. And outside of a select few people that were my friends inside and outside the church. Okay, so when I mean these were my friends outside the church, inside the church. We were Christian friends, but friends, and they were not on the administrative body of the church. Okay, so they weren't in positions of administration, seeing to the duties of the church and the mission of the church and the ministry of the church. I have been members of churches for years and never once have been called. Never once. I hear people talking about, well, pastor, home visitations by your pastor. And this is the truth. This is the truth. A lot of people might question this, but this is the truth. I am 54 years old. I have had a pastor come to my house to visit me one time in my entire life. Once. Once. So I'm like, and I get it because, I've worn this hat. I've preached. I've actually done music ministry. I've actually worked with youth. I've cleaned. I've cooked. I've food driven, and I've driven the church van and buses. I don't know that there's necessarily a role within a church that I haven't at some point put hand to the glove in. Mm-hmm. And I understand what it's like for some people to be there and be disregarded. And then on the other side, and what led me to that was you said, people that are there that are contributing and not being appreciated. And so those are sort of, that's why I brought that in, because those are sort of similar. They're different, but they're similar because both of those are examples of neglect, church neglect. We're not fully ministering to those who are doing the ministering. Mm-hmm. And everybody needs to be ministered to by the church, even the ministers. Mm-hmm. It's not, we get this thought in our head that the Sunday school teacher, the administrative staff, the all these people that are in these positions, well, they've got all their stuff together. They're perfect on the Bible. They know all that. They're best friends with Jesus. Jesus comes to their house on Christmas Eve and has Christmas dinner with them. Apparently, they've got their vehicles are great. They're on top. Their oil gets changed automatically by the angels, and you know what I mean. And I'm exaggerating, of course, but we have this barrier that they don't need ministering to in any way. And that's false. I
want to challenge you on something that you said, because actually that is something that as a pastor has caused me church hurt. When you said, and I hear that it's hurtful to you. You said, not once has a pastor come to visit me. And I can understand that is hurtful. But as a pastor, I cannot physically go to every household when it suits them at their time.
No. And I understand that. But I guess my question is, when I say a home visit, I mean not a phone call. Hi, this is just your pastor, just calling you to say how you're doing or whatever. Mm-hmm. I hear people talk about that experience. And I also want to, I should maybe preface this by saying, I'm not upset by it. I say that I've only ever had that happen one time in my life. Mm-hmm. I'm not upset by it. It doesn't bother me. So I'm not saying that as a shame on you pastors comment. I'm just saying I've heard about these people to whom that is important. And I'm like, okay, on one level, that's putting a lot of pressure on your pastor if you assume that he's supposed to come to your home and visit you outside of your church experience. And there's nothing wrong with that. I get that. But if you assume that, then you also assume he must be responsible to do the same thing with everybody else, And there's a church here in this town, that has, we know, like over 10,000 members. Mm-hmm. Well, how long would it take for the pastor to individually go to the homes of 10,000 members?
I think what you're trying to say is it's not the pastor's sole responsibility to visit and to even make phone calls to every member, but it is
right.
the entire church to be mindful of the members, that maybe if there is a spiritual need to, and the pastor doesn't know, to let that pastor know. Because if the pastor doesn't know that there is a need, then how can you expect the pastor to make that phone call?
Well, yes. What I'm talking about here is a form of accountability, because the only way to nullify neglect is with accountability. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm saying is that just like you were outlining, if I'm aware that there was somebody here that needs or could use or would very much benefit and appreciate a private talk with the pastor, but for some reason, let's just say that they don't want someone to see them go to the pastor's office and request a private audience with the pastor in his chambers, because there's something going on that's heavy enough for them. They don't want any opportunity for drama or gossip. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that happen.
Yes.
And so even though there probably might not have been, or I don't know, there could have been, I don't know, but I'm just saying, they don't even want the opportunity for it, so they'll avoid that. Then I go to that person and say, you know what, Pastor, I really think it would behoove you to reach out to this person and find out whether or not they would like to. I'm aware there's some issues going on, and they may need some spiritual counsel. And now here's the thing too, and I'm going to put this out there: if you're the person that noticed it and you're the person that's bringing it to the pastor's thing, you ought to be willing to go with him.
Yes,
you ought to be willing to go with him.
Very much so. Yes,
because there's a reason you noticed it. Mm-hmm. See,
yes,
the Holy Spirit is giving you an opportunity to live up to what you call your Christian walk. You saw it for a reason. And so you could say, you know what, I'm not so sure that I feel like I'm equipped for this, but I saw it. So, Pastor, this has come to my attention, and I'd like, if you don't mind, let's call on Brother so-and-so over here. And if you're comfortable and he's comfortable with it, I'd like to be there with you. And
I agree with that.
And so what's happening is here, number one, we're stepping out of our comfort zones. Number two, we're actually attending to the needs of both this pastor here, who now he's not feeling pressured and demanded on, and we're attending to people who need to be seen. And this is just an example, and there's many we could pull. We're just using this one. And so now we're somebody who needs some counsel, and we're going to try to get them counsel. Mm-hmm. And so nobody's being overlooked, nobody's being neglected, nobody's being pressured, and having, because to me that's also a form of neglect. If you expect something out of somebody, I don't know what the actual word I'm looking for is. Mm-hmm. But it's like, well, I'm looking for a full-time pastor, and I need to make sure that he can preach. I need to make sure that he can teach all the Sunday school classes, and he needs to be able to teach youth. Okay. Mm-hmm. He also needs to be able to run the nursery. Okay. He also needs to be a handyman and can fix the copier when the copier goes down, and he needs to be able to compose and print all the Sunday bulletins. He needs to keep up with all the birthdays. Okay. He needs to drive the church vans. And he needs to keep the bathrooms and everything stocked full of toilet paper. And he needs to keep all the candles in the building trimmed. And he probably needs to vacuum everything if there's carpet or whatever. And if the light bulbs go out in the church, he needs to be able to facilitate, getting those changed, even if they're, 75-foot ceilings or whatever. That's fine. We can do that. And it'd be great if he also knows a little bit of plumbing. If he can fix leaks and things too, that'd be cool. What are we looking for here? And I've seen places that it's almost that bad. And of course, I'm exaggerating on purpose to try to somehow have a little bit of levity to this situation. But you're now neglecting the pastor's genuine needs by overloading him, because the pastor also needs time and rest and moments with his or her family.
Yes.
They have to have all these same things too. They're people. And so you have to minister to their needs as well. This is reciprocal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the biggest areas that, I encounter. And when this is a great challenge for those people who are listening to us. I would love for you to actually bring this specific topic up in your church. I would love to hear you create a discussion forum about it. And I would love feedback on what your church, how your church handles discussing it. What changes your church body experiences? Because you just dared to have a discussion. This is stuff that is it's life changing, it's church changing, it's community changing, it's kingdom changing. And it starts with us being willing to simply sit down and love each other and respect each other enough to talk about it. And so if you do this, if you have these conversations and you're already seeing more people participating in the conversation in your area, in your church, and you're seeing dramatic change, or you're seeing growth in your church, or you're seeing groundwork laid for bigger and better things, do me a favor. Let us hear about it. Okay, let us hear about it. And when we wrap all this up, we'll give you the contact information on how to contact us. What else you got for tonight's topic here? So we're talking about being church hurt, but from the ministry side of things instead of the parishioner side of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like that we've covered the expectations of a pastor, and so always be just another advice for the church, for your local church, to look at not just what you may perceive your church needs in a pastor, but look at your community and look towards the future. And also, with your current pastor, that's one of the ways. I mean, I think something else we can talk about another time is just how, in general, we as human beings can overcome burnout. But that is one way that you can help your pastor escape burnout, is to give your pastor space to have some one-on-one retreat, private prayer time with God, to dream again and to vision for the future, and so that means the church will have to handle some of the responsibilities, the day in and day out, Sunday morning sermon, even handle the responsibilities while you give your pastor just a week, 2, 3 weeks would be magical time to go and to dream and to pray and to vision the future, to have some goals in mind and to have a direction for the church and be willing to see where God could take you guys into the future, because that is one of the most important roles of a pastor. On top of all the other things that you listed, some of the things that the church expects the pastor, one of the things that gets neglected from the pastor's perspective, and one of the things that calls the person into ministry, is the fact that God has put a desire on their heart and a call on their heart to change the world in their community where they are sent. And to allow your pastor to do that, to dream, to vision, to cry out to God and to see where your community is and get to know a future direction for the church, could be very powerful for the pastor and for your church.
Awesome. So yeah, and I completely agree. I think that as a church, if you want your church to grow, you need to be willing to grow it. If you want your garden to grow, you better be willing to tend it. And so, if your pastor is sort of the leader of your church, then get behind your leader and be led and be part of the ministry. Because if your church is growing, he's going to need help. And those people who are active are the helpers, and they're going to need help, and they're going to need help, and they're going to need help. And pretty soon, your 200 member church could wind up being like the church we mentioned earlier, 10,000 member church. It's a big church. I got news for you. One man ain't doing all that. Mm-mm. One man ain't doing all that. So you've got to get in there, and you've got to be part of the ministry, and you've got to be willing. You've got to be wanting, and it's got to be reciprocal. Hey, thank you very much for tuning in. Getting my tongue wrapped around my teeth there, couldn't talk. We appreciate it every day. We thank you. We're so blessed. We're so grateful for you. If you want to write to us, reach out to us, if you have a topic that you want hammered out here in the Forge, we'd love to hear about it. We want to talk about it. And you can write to us at onekingsforge@gmail.com. That's the number one, kingsforge@gmail.com. And you can write to us via post by writing to the King's Forge, P.O. Box 2590, Shelbyville, Tennessee 37160. And as always, if you want to know more about who we are, what we are, if you want to support us, if you want to get a backlog of some of our videos and podcasts, you can do so by going to thekingsforge.org. Again, multiple times, thank you. We love you very much. We hope God blesses you mightily, and we hope that you walk in the fullness of your Christian walk every day, because we want you happy. We want you blessed. And we want to see you back here in the King's Forge. Thank you.
You know, as Christians, one of the hardest things that we seem to be able to do is to take a good, hard, introspective look at ourselves. But that's exactly the purpose of the Bible. The Bible was meant to change the individual believer, to change our heart, to change our mind, and ultimately to change our behavior. If you've ever wondered, am I fully in? If you've ever wondered, am I walking in the fullness of genuine, empowered Christianity? Or do I sometimes feel like maybe there's something missing? I've written a book to explore those avenues and get us to talk about it. It's called Christianity Untried, and I would be grateful if you would head on over to barnesandnoble.com and order a copy for yourself.